Hi, my name is Kyle. I've been incredibly shy since I was a child. Even my little brother tells me this and constantly mocks me. My mother thinks it's better than being a bully or a jerk. But the thing is, I'm a boy and I'm almost 18 years old. But I'm still friendless, and of course, I've never had a girlfriend yet. But one day, my mother solved my problem. I think I overdid it a little. We were about to graduate from high school. As expected, there were couples going there. Everyone has long been distributed, and I, as always, remained invisible to my classmates. This was very upsetting to me. At first, I tried not to attach any importance to it, and even refused to go to the evening. But the closer the holiday got, the more I wanted to go to it. So one evening, I sat in my room and looked at the school yearbook. I suddenly realized that in the photo, I was always standing behind, almost never smiling. In short, I was really like a shadow. I wasn't even bullied because I became so unnoticed. Then my mother came in and saw the album and asked if I had decided to walk down memory lane. Then she called it cute, and I snapped. "No, Mom, I didn't decide to remember my school years. And you know why? Because I have no memories." I shouted to the whole room. My mother was just in shock. It seemed to be the first time she had heard my anger. She gave me a little hug and told me everything was going to be all right, but I knew they were just words. The day after school, my mother sent me to the store to pick out a birthday present for my grandmother. I had no idea what to give her and got stuck in the tableware department, thinking maybe I could give my grandmother a frying pan that she wanted for a long time. While I was thinking, this very pan was grabbed by some girl. I apologized and said it was mine. "Then why hasn't it been bought yet?" she asked me. I told her I was just going to buy it for my grandmother. "Well, if only for Grandma," the girl said. And then she asked me to help her with a gift for her grandfather. "Why, he's your cook, since you also wanted to take this pan," I asked. She nodded her head. We left the store together. Probably an hour later. All this time we wandered between the shelves and looked for the right thing. Her name was Mary. It was only when I got outside that I got a better look at her. She was incredibly sweet, and surprisingly, I was so comfortable with her. I didn't even act like an idiot when I first spoke to her. I just didn't know how to ask for her phone number. There was an awkward pause between us as we parted, and Mary, unexpectedly for me, was the first to ask for my phone number. I was beside myself with happiness. I went home with the pan in my arms. I think my smile didn't go away all the way. In the evening, I called her, and we chatted for another 2 hours. Later, I went to my mother and asked for some pocket money for a date. My mother bombarded me with questions about who she was, but seeing that I did not really want to tell, did not torture me and advised a cozy place where you can take your lady. I was glad. I combed my hair, ironed my clothes, and took Mary to the cafe. I didn't know if she was so great, or if I'd learned to joke. She looked me straight in the eye all night and laughed at my jokes, and I don't know how to tell them at all. After a delicious dinner, I walked her home and she kissed me. You know, I didn't think this was happening to me. It was too much like a fairy tale. A couple of months with Mary passed like a dream. You already know that I went to the prom with my girlfriend. My classmates were simply stunned by what they saw. Thanks to Mary, she tried to look like a goddess. She was wearing a gorgeous evening dress. I was happy that this was the last impression I left of myself. Then it was time to go to college. Mary also planned to enroll, and we started choosing together because we wanted to study together. At dinner, my mother asked about my plans, and I told her that the documents we have already submitted, waiting for an answer. My mother choked and asked, "What girl?" "Mom, what are you doing?" "With Mary, of course. You know we're together. We plan to study together," I told her. My mother suddenly got angry and said that she was a negative influence on me and I should break up with her. "What? Why should I? I'm happy with her, Mom." We had a big fight that night. I couldn't believe that my mother would just want to take my first love away from me. Coincidence or not, we were supposed to meet her the next day to go to my friend's house for a party, but she said she was sick and couldn't go out. I was upset, but I said I would definitely visit her later. She refused, said she didn't want to infect me. She was ill the next day, and then again and again and again. We almost stopped communicating, even on the phone. She refused to talk to me for more than a minute. I had no idea what was going on. I went to her house and her parents said that she had gone to her sister in another city and asked her to pass a note for me. It said that she didn't love me anymore and she asked for my forgiveness. I couldn't believe she'd done this to me. How? We made plans. I came home incredibly broken. I was so sick. I didn't even know what was hurting me. I only felt that the focus was somewhere in the chest area. I was constantly gasping for breath and could barely hold back my tears. I didn't speak to anyone for a few days. And then my mother came into the room to find out what had happened, and she said she was sorry it had happened. A week later, I received an answer from the college. I entered, and it made me happy, although it reminded me of her. I planned to leave as soon as possible and start a new life. On the day I left, I decided to go to the same store to buy some dishes for college. And yes, I saw Mary there. She was standing by the frying pans, holding the one that had made us meet. I was confused. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do, come or go. While I was rushing around, she saw me, and in surprise, she dropped the pan on the floor. She started to run away, but I shouted, "Mary, wait!" Then I went to her, and she was crying, and she couldn't say anything. "Why are you crying? And why did you leave me? You don't love me anymore?" And she couldn't say anything, just cried and cried. I wanted to hug her, but then my mother came into the store. She was waiting outside in the car. "Son, did you buy everything?" she said, and saw us. Mom's face changed instantly. Mary suddenly screamed and cried even more, and then ran to my mother, threw the envelope in her face, and ran away. There was money in that envelope. I didn't know what was going on. I asked my mom what the hell was going on. How did she know my ex-girlfriend? My mother took a deep breath and told me everything. It turns out that she hired her to go to prom with me. "You were so alone, and I wanted to help you. I paid her. The plan was very simple, but it got out of hand. She was only supposed to go to the prom, son. I didn't think you'd fall in love with her so much. And then she told me that she didn't want to leave you because she really loved you. I got angry and chased her away. I said that I would not allow you to meet," my mother said. God, I couldn't believe it. I was so mad at her. "Thank you, Mother, for your service. What she did to you is so bad that you are against her." "Well, you hired her for me," I cried, and ran after Mary. When I caught up with her, she begged me to forgive her. My girlfriend admitted that at first it was a game, but she fell in love with me sincerely, but can't go against my mother's will. Without thinking, I suggested that she pack up and go to college with me, especially since Mary was also accepted to study. When we went to my house together to talk to my mother, I explained that I really loved her. I apologized to my mom for yelling at her, but I thanked her for changing my life so drastically. "I know you meant well, but it turns well. I'm happy, and we really love each other," I told her. My mother started crying, and then told us to come home and visit her more often.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary. Let me tell you my unusual story, whether I was right or not. In general, since my childhood, I was an ordinary child. I didn't differ from my other peers. Everything would be fine, but one day when I came home from school, I saw my parents. In fact, they should be at work at that time. Their faces were agitated. It really scared me. I immediately went to them and find out what happened. My father said we should all go to a friend's house together. The friend's name was James. Unsuspecting, I agreed. Soon we found ourselves in an office. It's strange that we visit a friend at his work. When he started the conversation, he kept looking at me, asked how we were doing in the family. Is nothing unusual happening? I knew it wasn't just that. Then he asked me if I noticed any strange things in my life lately, but it was still the same as usual. Later I find out that this was not a friend of my father, but a psychologist. But why and for whom this appointment? I didn't understand. Our conversation was quiet. In a moment, I noticed that James was looking at me with an unusual look. You could even say demonic look. His eyes were bright red, and his brows were furrowed like the devil. This scared me very much, and I tried to ignore it. After the conversation, we drove home in silence. Everyone thought about their own things. and I was not happy because it seemed like my parents had cheated me about the psychiatrist. That seemed to be the end of it. I also continued to go to school and do my own things. But no, on the next day, when I came home from school, I saw the psychiatrist at our house. They were talking about something. When James saw me, he smiled maliciously. His eyes were still red. I noticed fangs and teeth, like he looked like a vampire. I got scared and yelled at him, "Get out of the house, you devil!" and ran quickly to the room and locked myself in. My parents ran after me. They were calling for me and shouting for me to open the door. It wasn't like them. They had never even raised their voices to me before. I was scared. I crawled under the bed. Mom began pounding viciously and harder and more furiously, and Father laughed in the background. It seemed that the door was about to break. I gathered my courage and quickly jumped out under the bed, and I jumped out of the window and ran quickly away from the house. In shock, I didn't even notice that I had already run for several miles. Sitting down to catch my breath, I began to think about what really happened. There were different options in my head, and only one thought kept repeating itself: that this psychiatrist was actually a devil in the guise of a man, and he wanted to ruin our perfect family. It was like an epiphany. I hated James very much, and the plan matured. I had to make sure that the psychiatrist has disappeared from our family. After thinking it over and calming down, I went home. I had to walk for a long time and returned only in the evening. When my parents were already asleep, I went quietly to my room and fell asleep. I woke up from the fact that my mother woke me up. My father and my psychiatrist, James, were also in the room. They all had red eyes and were laughing maliciously, and the appearance of the psychiatrist changed at times to the devil. He was wearing a black cloak and big horns. Sharp, bloody fangs protruded from his mouth. I broke away from my mother and ran to the kitchen. She grabbed a knife and tried to stab James. But just as my father grabbed my arm and pulled me back, I lost my balance and fell to the floor and lost consciousness. I didn't wake up until morning in the hospital. I saw 3 men in white coats standing over me. I couldn't move because my hands and feet were tied, and her mouth was taped shut, probably to keep her from screaming. One of them took out a syringe and gave me an injection. After that, everything began to blur around me and make me sleepy. Falling asleep, I saw the silhouette of the devil on the wall. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, I saw my mom and dad. She sat next to me on the bed and looked at me anxiously. When I came to myself, I thought it was over, and James won't bother us again. Later, the doctor came and said that I have schizophrenia. I couldn't believe it. This can't be happening, especially with me. And in addition to this, I have learned that I often scream in my sleep lately. But I didn't believe the doctor. I felt quite well, and with the exception of recent events, I didn't notice anything unusual. But the doctor still prescribed some pills and ordered a trip to the psychiatrist who was in the same hospital. He called him in to introduce me. This psychiatrist turned out to be quite a good and solid person. He asked me if I was feeling all right. He seemed quite a nice man. But in an instant, I saw his eyes flash red.